Hi, I'm Aaron.
I'm Lauren, and we're with Fibonacci Farm. We are a no-till organic practice diversified vegetable and flower farm. We farm on 2 acres, and we are just finishing our second year.
A big reason that we started this farm was to, do our part to have a positive impact to curb climate change. And being a no-till farm and knowing that we have the ability to sequester carbon through farming and feeding our community is pretty positive and powerful for us. Participate in this trial because water conservation is everything in Central Oregon. A lot of farmers are seeing no water this year. A lot of farmers south of us have seen no water for a couple years. So any research that can be done to look into, ways to conserve water is pretty cool. And us being a no-till farm, it kind of made perfect sense for us to do, some trials on no-till water conservation using drip irrigation.
Our soil here is very sandy. It's like a sandy loam.
Last year, we created all these beds new last year. We put cardboard down the entire acre field out there, cardboard lasagna, so we did cardboard and lots of compost, and then the pathways were wood. Before that, there was a lot of tilling going on.
We farm in the high desert. It can have really drastic temperature swings. At night it will be 25, during the day it can be 90.
Seasons can change super fast. We go from spring to summer in what seems like a night. We run this farm entirely on drip irrigation. That drip irrigation is fed from a pond. We end up getting irrigation in the middle of May. This year it was May 15th. The irrigation is going to be turned off, October 15th. If we leave with a full pond, we might be able to go into November with that. Depending on the year, sometimes they'll scale down the flow, depending on how the reservoir is looking or how the flow in the river is going. We've had a pretty good year, I'd say. We didn't really want for any water. We're lucky to be on Central Oregon Irrigation District, which for whatever reason does get quite a bit of water and sees the fewest shutoffs in the Central Oregon districts. This trial, we did a mix of different types of zinnias. We had 3 trial beds, 3 bed preparations. The first bed was our standard bed prep, which is using a broad fork and a tilther to kind of smooth in that bed, also adding some compost. Our second trial bed was, we wanted to simulate tilling because we don't really have a tiller. So I grabbed a hoe and just kind of whacked at the bed, compacting the ground as much as I could at about a foot deep, and also uplifting and overturning the dirt as much as I could. And I think that pretty much did what a tiller does. The third bed we had was our actual no-till bed. We left cauliflower Romanesco in the bed over winter, and then when springtime came, we just pulled those up. The bed was a little bit compacted, but we were still able to plant into it, and so those are our 3 bed preps. I had a few takeaways generally from the trials. I noticed that the beds that were either used the tilther or no-till definitely held water a little bit more constantly. And the bed that did see the tillage, it started off wetter, it ended up being the driest bed. And similarly, the tilther bed started off as one of the wetter beds, ended up being drier, where the no-till bed that I just planted directly into the cauliflower mass, that finished a little bit wetter in the season than when it started at the beginning of the season. One of the things we noticed too in the trial beds was that the no-till bed did a really good job of controlling the weed pressure, especially early in the season. As the season went on, we saw some more, of weed seeds being germinated, and that just kind of happens, especially in August and end of July. But the tilled bed pretty much from the beginning had weeds, and also the bed where I used the broad fork and the tilther, that one had less weeds, I'd say, than the tilled bed. The tilled bed stood out as getting like a lot of these like annual grasses popping up, things that we had kind of dealt with last year in tarping. They popped up. We didn't really use the tensiometers to make watering decisions per se, but it was pretty affirming that, you know, when it wasn't over 95 degrees and we were watering every other day, things stayed in a pretty good level. And when it was super hot and we were watering every day, you can see that the levels are stayed pretty much the same. So it's pretty affirming to us to know that that was the right thing to do, and that we're just really trying to keep the soil at a constant moisture. Given the data, I would be interested to leave more crops in the ground over the winter, and because it really helped with the weed suppression. It was awesome, and those beds held the most moisture. That being said, cauliflower, those beds had so many aphids on them. Mm-hmm. It was just like covered in aphids.
It smells pretty bad after a while. It wasn't
not too appetizing. So I'm interested to see what other kinds of like other crops that might cover as much ground, but not brassicas that just bring the aphids to play. So it's really cool to have the tensiometers now. This trials really got some ideas rolling around in my head about, you know, how different preparations of soil and different things that I do might affect their ability to hold the soil's ability to hold water. For instance, we use tarps quite a bit, and we found that that's really good for weed suppression, and it gives me a nice clean slate in the spring to plant in pretty early. But where possible, we do like to cover crop. We terminate that by crimping or like weed whacking and then tarping, and it really adds some nice organic matter to the soil, which in my head I feel like that might help with water retention a little bit more than just tarping. But you know, in the spirit of like crop rotation, and you know, I will probably end up cover cropping these areas that I tarp maybe next year. I'm just curious to see, you know, what other data we might be able to figure out from the trials. Gave me ideas. Yeah.